Welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. Now, I started this week talking about ideas and how everything that we see around us, everything we experience, the motivations and inspirations we have around us, fundamentally come from ideas. There's something that animates this world. Some of those ideas are by people long gone, but we're kind enough, sometimes even cruel, to leave an idea, and that idea has suddenly become flesh and has thrived. Depression is one of those ideas, and a lot of young people suffer these days from depression, not because of what happens to them on a day-to-day basis, but instead based on a fear of what could happen, something in the distant future. Some people call fear false expectations that appear to be real, or false evidence that appear to be real. Now, irrespective of whether they're false or they're true, recognize that the mind cannot distinguish between a real or an imagined experience. And because it cannot, the body internalizes and experiences the same vibrational reaction as if it were true. And so we start this whole conversation about depression by asking a question. Is it possible to die to your old self, a self that is plagued with depression, and to be reborn, to have a new birth as a new person and one who does not understand the word depression? Is it possible? If you live in the West, I'm sure you would reject my hypothesis. You would say he doesn't understand and he's doing more harm to people. Well, remember, it was just a question. Is it possible? Now, depending on how you reacted to that question, we have an idea of what idea animates you. I'll say that again. If your gut instinct reaction was one of shock, surprise, even perhaps you're slightly aghast as to how can he even say that, it means that you are wedded to something that is a belief system that has become your God. You see, the opposite of love is indifference, not hate. Indifference. So when people say, I hate him or I hate that thing, that is not the opposite of love. Whereas if you say, I am indifferent, that is much more powerful, because it means you're not assigning any emotion, particularly any negative emotion, to said thing. So somebody can talk about depression, and I feel absolutely no emotions. Why? In my subconscious mind, and in my, you might say, the core of my belief or my philosophy or my worldview, I subscribe to an understanding that I was made great, for great things. Now, it doesn't mean it comes to being a material fruition, but my idea is we were wonderfully and fearfully made, like an artist making something, a great piece, being very careful not to make a mistake, and doing it in a fascinating way that he looks back and he says, oh, that is very good. That is my view. Now, you might say that I am deluded, and that's perfectly reasonable. Now, you might even be right. But here's the key question. Does my delusion create after its own kind? And does that delusion lead to a path of light? Or, like the bumblebee, intelligently ignorant, unaware that it cannot fly according to man-made laws of thermodynamics, or interpreted laws, I shouldn't say man-made technically, but the laws of thermodynamics that says the bumblebee is too big. It has very small wings. Therefore, according to the law of aerodynamics and thermodynamics and all the other physical laws, it should not be able to fly. The bumblebee is not human. It doesn't understand thermodynamics and it doesn't understand aerodynamics. So, bumblebee does what it does best, which is, I like to go from point A to point B, and so it flies. It's not limited by self-imposed limitations. So, coming back to my story, perhaps I am deluded. But if my delusion is not limiting, and I haven't placed self-imposed or haven't accepted external self-expressed or imposed limitations, and if my pathway leads me to life as I define it, then perhaps, just perhaps, the philosophy that I subscribe to might be more superior to a philosophy that says that depression is part of the human experience and that it is natural to be depressed and that you should look after your mental health and that you should embrace the suffering that comes with depression and medicate. These are two worldviews that are opposite, that are diametrically opposed to each other. One is life, and I think the other is addiction, destruction, and pain and suffering. And so in this session today, as I build on this core concept of ideas, let me draw in philosophy. I know this is not supposed to be a philosophical conversation, and when we're talking about depression, we don't want to go too deep into philosophy. I would leave you with the following, and I think it's important that you embrace what you think can help you and just discard what you may not believe to be of any value to you. But it's necessary to keep this in mind. Think of yourself as a sailor. And as a sailor, you have a compass on a boat. And the boat you have has got sails. And you are experienced. You know how to set the sails. You have an idea about the direction you want to travel and the destination you want to get to. But the boat has to face the direction that it wants to travel in. And you have to make a decision. One of those decisions is, how do you set your sail in a manner that ensures or guarantees that you move in the direction of your destination? What if I said to you that if you understood that concept, a boat, a sailor, sails, destination, direction, decision, basic things, we all understand that. However, philosophy is simply how to set your sail. It gives you an idea about how to interpret the events around you, how to express yourself during said encounters, and perhaps how to teach or share with others what you've gone through. We all have a philosophy. We may not be very defined, or we may not define our philosophy too rigidly. You're going to hear me talk about consequentialism as a philosophical position, or utilitarianism as a philosophy. We might even go as far as talk about hedonism, and even the whole concept of the do no harm principle, libertarianism. All of these are philosophies. Christianity is a philosophy. Islam is a philosophy. Hinduism is a philosophy. It's just a way of setting your sail, a way of understanding the world, a way of understanding the direction of travel, and a way of interpreting events that occur and happen to you. Without a grounding philosophy, you might find that perhaps you're like one of those people who changes clothes every minute of the day, unsure about what they want, where they're going, and I guess at the whims of those who simply stare at them. And you would drop a philosophy and pick up another one and drop another one and pick up another one simply because you're not grounded. The foundations of a building will always be the most important part. And I've said this in sessions in the past. The taller the building will be, the deeper the foundations have to go. So much so that you might go from being a traditional structural foundation to being a piled foundation, where you put piles into the ground to support this entire structure. And your life should be thought from the perspective of you being this very tall skyscraper, something on a hill that everybody can see, something beautiful and majestic and magnificent. And you have the opportunity to create substructures on the same land but all of them are undergirded and supported by a foundation. And therefore, the question always comes, how deep are your roots? And how well rooted are you? So that when the wind comes and the rains come and the wind blows, you stay firm. Why? Because you're well grounded, you're well rooted. And where you root yourself is by the right philosophy. Now, recognize something. You're going to have to try different things. But I like the whole idea of fail fast and fail early. Be inquisitive, be curious, be open-minded, but always use logic in trying to understand whether a philosophical position or proposition empowers you or disempowers you. Now, if anyone comes to you, myself included, and I say that you're no good for anything and that depression is something that you should simply accept as part of the human experience, I could be right, it being part of the human experience. And the reason I would be right is because depression is simply a vibration, and it would be no different from saying wealth or poverty or pain, excitement is part of the human experience. Yes, it is, because it's simply a vibration. It's a resonance, and we can tune into vibrations and we can tune out from vibrations. And so it will be correct. But if I posed it in a manner that simply said that is your fate, I'm depressed, well, just take some medication. I'm not helping you. My philosophy is not empowering you. And so all philosophies should aim towards allowing the best form of who you are to flourish. Spirit is always looking for its full expression. Spirit never stagnates, it never stays, which is why at the end of a short journey, spirit has to leave the body, because the body has become constrained and therefore it keeps expressing itself. You never die as a human being. Your body decays, but your spirit never dies, because it just is. And so you go from expression to expression, and one of the expressions is the animation of a body, a humus body that you have, or that I have. And if you understand philosophically, or if you choose a philosophical position that is so liberating and empowering, that says you have no limitations, you have no restrictions on potentiality, that you are one with your maker, God, Allah, Buddha, whatever God you might choose, that you are one with whatever deity that you've created, and that you were made in a special way. That position starts to alter how you see yourself. You see, if you go through the books of time and history, the struggle that all people faced was the issue about trying to reconcile who they were. You have great generals and great engineers and great people leave their memoirs and their journals, and in each of the great people's journals you tend to find a search for the purity of who they were, a sense that, I've done all of this but I'm still not happy with myself. And that's partly because of either an environmental experience or a philosophical idea that they bought or they chose or they became one with. Now, the point of this is that if you look through the books of antiquities and you study great people, people who overcame almost all odds, you tend to find something similar. And that similarity comes in the idea that they believe that despite what happens in this physical life we have, that there's something good promised. They also believe that death to the body is not death to the soul. They also believed that there was something greater than who they were, and there was a purpose behind their life, and their identity was not linked to anything material or anything hedonistic or anything in the material world of Caesar that we find ourselves, but it was linked to something transcendental, something divine, something beautiful, something pure, and something that was light. And therefore, in the short term, the expressions of pain and suffering were vibrational states that people went into and that people exited. And even if you stayed longer than you should have, you were aware that at some point the great equalizer being death neutralized that pain and suffering, and you were freed. And so there's this liberation that came with some people, not all people, but some people, where they felt, I have a purpose, I have a calling, I have a duty, I have an obligation, I have a responsibility. And one of the things I will never do is sacrifice any of those for my feelings, because my feelings are fleeting. They come and they go. 1 minute you've got a job, the next minute you've lost a job, you're depressed. The next minute you get a better job, and you find your feelings change with the weather. They go up and they come down, and they swing left and they swing right. But what's constant is yourself. And so by defining and formalizing a philosophy that you hold on to, but you review regularly to make sure that it's the right one, you give yourself some grounding in order to be able to withstand the structure above, because you're built on good soil and your foundation is well grounded. That is what philosophy does for you. In the session that follows, I'm going to start moving into the whole idea of how your philosophy connects to who you are, and how you go from philosophy to principles, to go to morality, and you move into ethics and values and integrity of self. And how, for most people, a lot of the suffering, a lot of the difficulty with depression is a lack of integrity. We'll talk about this in sessions to come, but keep this in mind. To be depressed is a human experience. To stay depressed is not part of your divine experience. Depression is simply a resonance, a vibration, a state of being. And like this room I find myself in, I can walk out of the door and walk into another room. In my father's house, the great writer says, there are many, many mansions. And in each mansion, there are many doors. One door could be wealth, another one could be suffering, another one could be depression, another one could be abundance. And so you walk into the wrong room, depression, and you walk out of the room. You're back in the lobby, you choose another room, and you remember not to go back to that same room. Why? It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't pleasant. And because it was not pleasant, you do not do it again. You pay the price once, you don't have to pay twice. I'll end today's session as follows. I actually think people deify their suffering. For some people, their identity is so built around anxiety, worry, and depression that they cannot fathom a new start. You have to be able to imagine a new start. I hope today's session has been useful.